The Infrastructure Summit coming. I know you don't know what that is, and I think I don't either.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
There are some conversations that we have had here and we will have here where I think to myself, how do I possibly make this interesting to you? And then after it's done, I say, well, that was pretty interesting. I hope you enjoyed that. And I think this is one of those conversations as we talk about an infrastructure summit that is coming up, and of course the Infrastructure Bank, which is decades old here and which does a very significant amount of work in terms of financing the stuff we need to keep the place in shape, if that makes any sense to you. So the CEO of the Infrastructure Bank has returned, and we'll introduce you to him momentarily. And this is the Friday show. You know that because you can check the calendar. We record the Friday show, as many of you know, on Thursdays. And so there's all sorts of stuff that's happening. I'm guessing, as you see this, based on my projection of Thursday early afternoon, which is what it is for me as I speak to you, and a post-primary kind of mindset, that the major story is Florence in the Carolinas. And I hope that between the time I'm saying this to you and the time you're seeing me say this to you, that this thing has dived a little souther and lost a little strength, and that those people are okay. I remind you about what's happening with that, at least at my post time early Thursday afternoon, as kind of a way to ask the CEO of the Infrastructure Bank, A, what he thinks about it, not that he's a weather guy or an emergency management guy, but whether or not we're infrastructurally sound for something like that. I don't know what kind of analysis we'll get, but certainly it's been on the top of our minds.
Towns up and down the Carolina coast are almost completely deserted. Officials are warning the few who stayed behind of the dangers ahead.
You put your life at risk by staying.
Forecasters predict the storm surge from Hurricane Florence could top 13 feet, enough to send water half a mile inland.
Today's the last chance for residents to get out of harm's way. Officials say when the storm is at its worst, first responders may not be able to help everyone get out of trouble.
That's Myrtle, and I mean, we're right there, so we're going to get, I don't know if you just heard what he said, but he said catastrophic damage to life and property.
Patrick Dunphy and Connor Zaya heeded the warnings. They left their South Carolina college and drove home to Massachusetts.
If that thing hits Myrtle, it wouldn't even be like we're worried about getting back to school. It's going to be like, what are we going to get back to?
Meteorologists say the storm's uncertain path has widened the threat to include parts of Georgia.
So funny that was at the end of the package. Are you a golfer, Jeff?
I am a golfer.
So I get this. I get this email from a buddy of mine yesterday. They're a gathering of 30 guys or so that I have participated with in the past to go to Myrtle Beach. This year was not on my agenda. I said, it's election season, can't really make it. And I got a text from my buddy, hey, Danny boy, we still have a spot here for Myrtle. And I wrote back, hey, Johnny boy, I wouldn't be so confident that there will be a golf course at Myrtle Beach come, Columbus Day weekend. Crazy, man. Welcome.
Thank you.
You've got a big event coming up next week, and there's a broad conversation about infrastructure in general. I don't want to lure you into, unless you want to make some primary analysis. That's not your thing. Do you have when I see walls and water and roads and collapse and worry and power lines and everything that we all freak out about when storms like this happen, I hear the word infrastructure, and I hear infrastructure tied to your management. I think there's a commonality there. At least you must have some thought on our ability to withstand where our infrastructure is here. Do you think about those things?
No, absolutely, and that's one of the things that we've been working on for years is how do we make the state more resilient to extreme weather events like this.
In fact, you have a resiliency officer who has been here before to talk to us about that kind of thing.
So, Sean O'Rourke, who's our director of stormwater and resiliency, who also wears the second hat as the chief resiliency officer of the state, just finalized the Resilient Roadie resiliency strategy for the state, and that really sets out roadmap for what we need to be doing in the state to make it more resilient to such effects. But frankly, the infrastructure bank's been doing that for years. I mean, we invested a significant amount of money in the Warwick wastewater treatment facility to build a berm and harden the assets there against another event like we had in 2010 when it was completely underwater. So we've done significant work there. We've invested $40 million in Newport's wastewater treatment facility to harden it against events such as Florence and others. And we've just closed on a loan and broken ground in Warren to invest $20 million in hardening their facility as well, to expand it, to do things like pumps that can work underwater, so even if there is some flooding there, that the sewer treatment facility still operates. So
again, you're not emergency management. You're not any of those things. I'm going to come back to some of this, worry about big storms and the like in a much more acute context to what you do. In a sentence or a paragraph, explain to everybody again what the infrastructure bank is and does.
Well, the infrastructure bank invests in local infrastructure, so we invest in sewers and drinking water. We help cities and towns repair roads and bridges, and we also make them more energy efficient and invest in renewable energy.
Okay, so when you're evaluating those things and you have a resiliency officer now, you're actually, as opposed to just sitting and waiting for requests, if I understand the progress of your organization and the modernization of its approach over the long haul and more acutely in the last few years, you're being more proactive and aggressive in going out there and saying, hey, by the way, FYI, you got a wastewater treatment liability over here, you got a couple of dead bridges over here, maybe locally. We're here if you need us, right? That's
Absolutely.
What you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we've completely transformed the organization really to be what I call customer-centric. So we're out getting the message about our programs, but more importantly, we're meeting with the cities and towns to better understand what their concerns from an infrastructure point of view are and how we can take our programs, our funding programs, financing programs, and help them get to where they need to be. And
so, as you're doing that, have you bumped into anything that either in an accumulation of locales where you say, hey, this place needs this, and this place needs this, and this place needs this, or hey, the whole place must need this because this, and this, vis-a-vis things like nature in Florence? I mean, is there something developing at the infrastructure bank where you've got a more widespread analysis as to what our preparedness and capability is?
Well, I think the Resilient Roadie strategy is very exciting for a couple of things. One, because it's a strategy. It's not a plan, right? It's about what do we need to do to move the state forward from a resilient point of view. And one of the things that gets me most excited is in working with all the stakeholders. We had 10 roundtables around the state, hundreds of stakeholders in those meetings. The biggest thing for me that's exciting is the fact that we identified 75 to 100 projects that the state needs to undertake to make it much more resilient. Many of those are in,
Say
many
that
of
again,
those
75
to 100 different projects that were specific projects that were identified that we can start working on now. Some of the work we've already started. Many of those projects are outside of our remit, but many of them we think that we can bring finance to make them more affordable to get done, and we're starting to work on them now.
So tell me, what is your disposition in running the infrastructure bank for Rhode Island in terms of comparing it to a commercial banking facility where, commercial banking is fascinating to me. I'm guessing you've got some experience in that world.
Yeah, that's where I came from.
Right? It's a fascinating world because you're out there marketing, selling, prospecting for loans, and as soon as you get a live wire, it's like fishing, right? You go out, you fish, and you fish, and you fish, you finally get one, and it's like, wrong fish, and you throw it back in the water, because once you get them, you've got to do diligence on them, and
Absolutely.
you've got to make sure that you don't extend yourself and the risk factor doesn't exceed the investment return. The infrastructure bank doing much of the same, or the stuff that you prospect you think is much more safe to finance?
It's a bit similar. I mean, we obviously are concerned about the risk of getting paid back because we take the money we get paid back and we recycle it into more loans.
But you're getting paid back mostly through public entities, correct?
That's correct.
Towns,
and so, yes,
and their quasis and all that kind of thing.
Exactly. But I think an important distinction is we want to help these infrastructure projects get done. Whether they finance with us is to a certain degree irrelevant, because again, we're not out there trying to cover shareholders. So a good example is we've hired a consulting engineer for energy that at our expense, that we provide their services free of charge to cities and towns and other quasi-state agencies.
I've asked this before. Do the cities and towns know enough about that service?
We think the message has gotten out, or we continue to drive that. I mean, 25% of our loans this year were what we call new business. New cities and towns coming into our programs.
But your loans come equipped with that consultation if necessary.
Absolutely.
Yes?
In fact, the convention center is going to be putting in a new heating and air conditioning and ventilation unit. That was a lot of the work that we really did with them, and providing our consultants to help them better understand what they should be doing from an energy point of view.
Because it protects your effort as well.
Well, it protects the state more importantly. I mean, that's what we're really thinking about.
And so go back. So you're not a rub two sticks together commercial profit organization. You are born of a charge from government.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, and so that really is kind of where you cover a unique niche.
Yes.
It seems to me, and you're trying to grow it from niche to what?
Well, what we're really trying to do is find those areas where we can bring cheaper finance than cities and towns can do on their own, and where the private sector isn't willing to go.
Do you carry better rates than a municipality can get?
Our bonds, our water bonds are AAA, which is the highest rating you can get, and higher than anybody else in the state. I think there's, Barrington might have one AAA rating.
All right. When we come back, do you get all that? I mean, it really is, as a citizen, a constituent, a voter, you should know that this thing exists, and you may want to bump into your sometimes clueless town councilor and say, by the way, did you ever talk to the infrastructure bank about that bridge we can't get over in the neighborhood? Maybe. When we come back, they got a summit next week, Monday. We'll talk about it. Stay with us. There's a joke. You'd like to be a fly on the wall during the breaks here. Infrastructure Summit in Rhode Island. Register. You spelled it wrong. It's supposed to be R-E-G-I-S-T-A-H. Register. Now here in Rhode Island. This is what, Mr. CEO? What is this thing?
This is our second of its kind. We did it last year. It's really meant to bring people around the state together to talk about infrastructure. It's not about the infrastructure bank, although we're happy to sponsor it, but it's really a gathering of people to discuss various aspects of the state and its infrastructure. And we have three themes. One is green infrastructure. The other is economic development. And also, forgot the third one now. But,
you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
That's right. I hate when that happens to me. It's nothing like a brain spasm, right? Live on television or recorded, as the case may be. Well, the green thing. So are you buying into some kind of development, urban planning philosophy thing here? Are you part of that whole, There's a philosophical argument going on in America right now, maybe between liberals and conservatives. I don't know that it's as clean or as easily identified as that, but there's a movement front out of Washington, pre the Trump administration anyway, that was urban planning, suburban planning. We're going to start, rather than having things organically develop, we're going to plan the living daylights out of this stuff. Where do you sit on that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, again, we're looking at individual projects, especially in the energy space, and it's about what can we do to help cities and towns, quasi-state agencies, businesses, and homeowners save money. In our energy loans to cities and towns and to businesses, we've saved, frankly, in cities and towns, we've saved them over $60 million.
That's not political.
In reduced energy costs.
That's not political. That's just dollars and cents.
Yeah.
Right?
And so that's $60 million that can be spent on other priorities.
Yeah.
And
the money's been saved because the financing has been so affordable? Is that what it is?
Well, we provide, to cities and towns, we provide below market financing, so it makes it even more affordable. But really, it's an economic decision. So if I make this investment in solar on the roof, or I make this investment in replacing my boiler and my lights to LED lights, I'm going to save more than it cost me to make that investment. And if it costs me $20 million to make that investment, and I can earn $60 million more in reduced maintenance and energy costs over the life of that project, That's a pretty easy decision, I think.
Sure. So you've got this infrastructure summit, and you've already got some 400 people signed up. So that's at least a litmus test for me to say, hey, this is a big deal. And you can register, but I would hurry because you're seeing this on Friday. And can they still get in over the weekend?
Can still get in on the weekend.
Good. Is there a cocktail hour?
We are not having a cocktail hour. We will have a reception after, but we are a quasi-state agency.
I got it. You know, well, you know what? Buy your own beers at the bar across the street. But the point here is that what kind of person watching this show right now and say, you know what, that's the kind of thing I need to get to? What is it? Who is it?
The people that are attending are really across the board. So we've got certainly some of our state legislators coming. We've got bankers. We've got a lot of town officials. Some of the advocacy groups and environmental groups. And, we've got some pretty good keynote speakers. We've got Armin Sabatoni coming from the Laborers, who will talk about the impact of infrastructure on the state. And back to your initial question, Alan Rubin, who's known as the Hurricane Czar, will be speaking later in the day. And they're actually at lunchtime. And, he's somebody who's foremost in his field about advising communities on disaster recovery.
And by the way, I've had some really, really smart people from URI talk to us about this, and there are major concerns in this state about what a Florence could do to us, especially when it comes to managing the ocean water. And of course, I always worry like heck about those folks in the East Bay who are, looking at 195 is the help, and God knows when 195 is actually there to help us. I mean, so there's a lot of Rhode Island, that kind of stuff that people need to be thinking, worrying about, fixing, preparing for, financing, right?
And again, getting back to the Resilient Rhody strategy, a lot of that is also how do we work together? And that's part of what the Infrastructure Bank has been trying to do. I mean, we're working on a very interesting project in the East Bay where there's a dam that's holding back water in a reservoir that's causing issues with that water.
Which one is that?
It's in Warren.
Okay.
And so, we're looking at how do we remove that dam. Of course, there's a lot of issues. What happens to remove the dam, right? It cleans up the water, but a lot of stuff spills down initially into the bay, so we got to be careful about that.
Is that something that people in Warren know about, or is that something that just officialdom is identified?
It's been a project that's been under discussion for many years, and we've been successful in bringing really everybody to the table. So we've got Bristol County Water, we've got the town at the table, we've got Department of Health, the Department of Environmental Management, Save the Bay, because they're very concerned about that water and coming into the bay. We also have Department of Transportation. Why? Because there's a culvert down the road or downstream that needs to be increased to accommodate the water. Well, it's also a road that floods all the time. And so not only in their budget, they've got a budget to repave that road. Well, why? Because it's always underwater. And now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be raising that road to accommodate the culvert, but also to keep it from flooding during events like we've had over the last couple of days, and potentially for a Florence event.
So when we come back, we'll touch base on a couple more things involved with the Infrastructure Summit, which again is Monday, so you should act quickly to register. But there's a mindset that I think Rhode Islanders have about their infrastructure in general. We'll talk about that when we come back, okay? By the way, Mr. Diehl just had, energy. The three themes for the summit, the Infrastructure Summit coming up at the Convention Center on Monday that you can register for. Again, the information will be on our website at foxprovidence.com, linked into them, but we'll pop that up one more time before we're done. It was green space, it was economic development, and the third was you phoned a friend.
Energy.
Yes, meaning you looked at your notes.
Yes.
Energy. And the energy part of that is quickly...
It's about energy efficiency, renewable energy, and what you can do to avoid the increasing cost of energy here in the state, as well as the environmental impact.
Yeah, and even homeowners need to understand. I mean, I just put in central air this year, and it was a good summer to do so, I'll tell you that much. And there were rebates, and we got some money back. And actually the efficiency of the system really cooled the house off at not that much more monthly bill. So multiply that by companies and government agencies that have big facilities that they've got to take care of. And of course, I think if it doesn't happen, since you're talking energy, if you guys don't talk about the schools at this Infrastructure Summit, then you're missing the broad side of the barn.
Well, that will be...
How's that for being scolded?
No, absolutely. That will be a theme that will weave throughout a lot of the panels. It's very important, frankly, to me personally. And one of the things that we've been doing, getting back to your point about being outreaching, is we're trying to change the way people think about infrastructure, not as a basic service, but as an economic development tool. But on the schools especially, thinking differently about projects. So if you're going to build an $80 million school, just don't go and say, well, I'm going to go and do an $80 million bond issue to finance that. If you think about a project like that, and of course some part of that will be subsidized by the state under the school construction bill that was passed by the Assembly and will be on the, the bond will be on the referendum this fall.
Right, on the ballot.
But think about the projects differently. So LED lighting, HVAC systems, heating, air conditioning, and ventilation, water conservation, stormwater management.
And those things can be X'd out and separately financed.
All those things can be financed with us, and we can provide financing that's cheaper than the towns can go to the market for.
Overall, every day on the radio, and I'm just as guilty of complaining about the roads and the stuff and the buildings and the bridges and even though roadworks is in play, we argue about the tolls and this and that. But by and large, I think Rhode Islanders are not very bullish on our infrastructure. Do you get the same sense?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot of concerns around it, but I think we've got some good plans going on in the state, and I think we have been doing a lot. A lot of it just isn't very visible, and that's part of what we're trying to do is
because it's system work. It's not a system work that you guys are doing. It's not sexy.
No. It's not sexy.
Hey, we got a new wastewater treatment plant. It's good at the flush, but we take for granted that the flush is going to work properly and cleanly and environmentally soundly. When it backs up or when the system blows, that's when we go, oh my God, right? So you're kind of like umpires. If you're doing a good job financing infrastructure, nobody makes a noise. But if we're not, all hell breaks loose.
Absolutely right.
Right.
And a lot of what we're trying to do is how do we stretch our dollars? A good example is Providence was going to issue $45 million worth of infrastructure bonds at the end of last year. We called them up and said, well, what are you going to finance with it? I said, well, a good part of it's roads and bridges. I said, well, we do have a bridge, or we do have a road program. And so, in that disaggregation, they sold $35 million of bonds to the market, and they sold $10 million to us to finance road repairs, and we saved them $1.6 million.
Okay, if you want to attend Monday, you should go to your website or ours. Yep. There you go, the Infrastructure Summit Rhode Island. Just Google that, and you'll be able to get it on, and we'll link to foxprovidence.com as well. As always, good to see you. Thanks for updating us, and have fun on Monday.
Great.
Do some good work for the state of Rhode Island.
Thank you.
3 things: green, economic development, and energy.
Energy.
Got it? Final word when we get back. Stay with us. Alrighty, so listen, infrastructure may not, it's kind of like the word budget. When I'm on the radio and we start talking about the budgets, I go, oh no, we're going to lose everybody. But when you start, falling asleep over things like infrastructure, that's when the infrastructure falls down and goes boom, and you don't pay attention. And really one of the things that's interesting about this infrastructure bank is that the local elected officials are coming around to the idea that there's easier financing for them for the projects that you got to do in their own hometown, but not all of them. So don't be afraid to let your local government know that there's access to cheaper dough and expertise that saves your taxpayer dollars. All right, big breath. Primary week is over. We'll regroup coming up and talk about casino gaming, new place in Tiverton, right? And more on the Monday show. Hope you have a great weekend. Pray for those people in the Carolinas. Good night.